Hello everyone, I am the Vibe Kage, coming to you with the second what if of the day. Now, you're hearing the song in the background because it is the what if Deku was sent back in time? Now, if you read the community tab, and then you get the quick gist of it. Now, in this timeline, Deku was denied by All Might, saying, you can't be a hero because you're quirkless. But Deku, being the big brain bastard that he is, says, fuck, UA, I'm gonna go to Island, tech this shit out, make fuck ton of money, art smart every single pro. Take pride in the fact that he knows all the weaknesses of every single pro hero in the book, creates hella tech and inspirations from this. So, not only that, Deku in this timeline has a syndrome mentality, just a little bit right now, at the moment. You know, if everyone has superpowers, no one really is special, and that is because he's in the last, 20%, and he finds it to be all bullshit. So, time progressed, and Izuku in this, yeah, over the 10 months, he pretty much, was a shut-in, building fuck ton of technology. He did go to Dagobah Beach, and from there he stole fuck ton of machines, parts, scraps, sold them off, did a lot of things. And yeah. During his little, goings and harvesting tech, he, despite it being a scrapyard, there were a lot of different pieces that he could use. There was something in particular that he was building. A time machine. Now, I bet you're wondering, why would Izuku be wanting to build a time machine? Now, this time machine has a simple purpose, and that is to go back to see his dad before he died. Wait, what? Oh, yes. In this timeline, the reason why Hisashi was never there, it was a simple tragedy of him dying when Deku was really young. And, Deku, it was just kind of heartbreaking. First not dying, but growing up without his dad, then being told he doesn't have a quirk, and now all this other shit. The last thing he remembers, happiness, like the true joys of life for him and his mother, was when his father was alive. So he's just like, I gotta go see dad again. Maybe he can tell me what to do. Deku, who has no true destination in the forward motions of life, figures that he must go back in time, and that's what his time machine is for. Yeah, I'm making it very tragic, I know, but during his time's adventures, like I said, he found this blonde-haired girl, thick old booty, glasses, long hair. He was just like, hamina, shboing, swing. Anyway, as time progressed, Izuku and this girl named Melissa Shield, which, as soon as he found out Melissa Shield, he's just saying, oh, then you're the daughter of David Shield, this tech, blah, 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 all this good jazz. Melissa kind of laughs in, surprised that someone knew a lot about her and her dad, despite them not really, well known by kids or teenagers her age, It's kind of rare. She feels a little bit flustered and blushes a lot. The two get along really well. And sure enough, over the 10-month time skip that would have been the entrance exam for UA, which Izuku does partake in, he pretty much says he builds his weapons, tech and all this good jazz, which they do allow him to go into. Which he gets first place. He finishes the written exam in 5 minutes. Everything just done, 100%. He would also, with all of his tech gear, and, Bakugo, he, was surprised, because he thought Deku was gone. He never even went to school. So, yeah. he was just confused because, he should have been next to Deku, but instead Deku was, put under those who are considered transferring? I don't know. It was strange. Deku was, transferring from a different school, but he went to the same middle school as me. That doesn't make any sense. How could Deku be transferring if we're both starting off UA? He didn't really know, but he did see there was something really weird. There's this blonde-haired girl that was with Deku who made him smile, so he's just like, I will make sure that ends. Now, things get kind of fucked up here. You see, All For One had found out the potential that Deku has with this time machine. And if, someone like, say, All Might, decides to go back in time to when All For One is barely having any of his powers, shit's gonna fuck up. So, All For One decides to feed Davis Shield a lie about Izuku Midoriya and how he's been resentful about All Might. He found out why Izuku Midoriya has been building this time machine and why he got so close to Melissa and David. They did fund some of his things, so David does feel this slight sense of betrayal, but also doesn't want to believe that Izuku would do such a thing. Now, time progresses. Izuku's, time machine would be almost done, so David would fuck around with some of the things in there. Just because. Now, Deku would not know about that because he's, taking the test at the UA entrance exam. And, well, what surprises everyone is that Deku is just fucking everything up. He has boots that propel him forward. What? Which one is it? What if Deku had the Speed Force? Nah, I'm good. Like I was saying, Izuku, some things are surprising everyone is, his boots propelling him forward up in the air, giving him advanced agility and mobility, being able to reach heights that no one can, and then being able to scout out where zero-pointers are. From there, he would be launching out these energy beams from his, pulsating gauntlets. I was about to say gloves, but nah, gauntlets. So everyone's just like, wait, he's using tech, he's cheating. Deku would quickly fly by past them and then straight up tell them, he made the tech himself, and then blast something right behind them to destroy not a zero-pointer, a two-pointer, in telling them, they might have quirks, but Deku has technology and an intellect that is more than 10 times every other quirked person here combined. Since not only can he build technology that outshines their abilities, Deku has the fact that he already plans for everyone else's weaknesses and has everything countered. So yeah, he shit talks everyone. Which, yeah, see, Melissa would be just going for general studies and tech support stuff, hero support and all that stuff. So her and May actually do get really good friends, become really good friends, my bad. Now, here's where things get kinda complicated. You see, after the zero-pointer shows up and everyone runs away, Deku even, as he's rushing towards the zero-pointer, he calls them out, every single kid running away, for being a pathetic waste of organic flesh. As he says, Gauntlet's max output as he shoots out a neutron blast, completely destroying the zero-pointer, and everyone's just like, what the fuck? Just in awe that Izuku created all this gear, and then the fact that he's just so ruthless. All Might notices that that's the boy who he turned down a long time ago. and he's seeing all this gear, and he notices something very, weird. This boy, he's just like, he looks different. He notices that it took him a minute because Izuku does look a lot more ripped, I guess you could say. He's a bit more built now. And yeah, he realizes that the gear that Izuku's wearing is gear that Melissa has sent him before. Saying that, these are the newest prototypes that her and her boyfriend have been working on. And, All Might's just like, no. He's not dating Melissa. No. He's just like, I'm going to fuck up this man for fucking my niece. Or attempting to fuck my niece. Which, yeah, towards the end of the exam, All Might would storm into Izuku telling him how he's been, using technology which is against the rules. Which, what pisses off All Might is the fact that, one person in particular tells All Might he's wrong. All Might did not like this, challenge of authority as he looks at Aizawa as he's saying, oh yeah? And explain, how is it possible for him to use these gadgets when everyone else is using their quirks? Well, 1, he's quirkless. 2, he built them himself. 3, he signed the right forms. And then, Aizawa then says this. And then the last thing that, I noticed, Nezu noticed, and most of the UA teachers noticed, he is definitely smarter than majority of the people here. That being said, him not being a hero is the equivalent of you becoming a villain. His intellect rivals, if not eclipses, your raw power output, All Might. Now, whatever bias you have, I need you to walk away because you're causing a scene. All Might looks around as he sees other students looking at him. Melissa kind of goes up to Izuku as he's saying, oh, hello, All Might, sir. She's hiding the fact that they know each other in real life. As, she's saying, I hope my boyfriend didn't do anything wrong. Deku just places his hand around Melissa's waist, and then with his boots just propels off. As, before anyone could say anything, Deku's just like, nah, don't worry, Melissa. Just, as he's holding her. It's just some issues that, a powerhouse has. All Might seems to like to bully, those who just don't seem to fit All Might's society. As, when he leaves saying that, everyone's just like, whisper, rumor, whisper, rumor. All Might's an asshole. All Might hates quirk people. Not quirk people. All Might hates quirkless people. All Might hates quirkless people. Which, that's kind of what spreads and is sent throughout the whole media, is All Might hating quirkless people because of how his reaction was to a kid who was quirkless, who tried out for UA, his rage towards it, and, Aizawa defending it. So, Aizawa's popularity actually shoots up by a good margin as quirkless individuals, they're like, hey, Aizawa for the win, Aizawa for president, Aizawa over All Might. Everyone's just like, well then, this is not what we thought would happen. As Izuku, some time had passed, him and Melissa, they, are working together with the time machine. Melissa does know the real reason why Izuku wants to build this time machine, and it fucking made her so sad. She's thinking, he just needs some advice from his dad because, the last thing, he could ever remember was his dad being, better, and then, dad gone, All Might And then All Might just rejected him. It is just like there literally is almost nothing else for him to go to. His mom, her health is getting worse, so she's bedridden now, and Deku definitely needs to make sure that his tech, cells, his technology could help his mom. Now that his mom is declining health as well, Deku's just like, he really needs to go back and save his family before it gets worse. Fuck not having a quirk. He can live with that. If he could just go back in time, tell us that not to go on a certain place, and then, keep his family together. His mom doesn't ever have to go through this, bullshit depression that made her go, off the rails with her health. Deku's just like, he could still, tell young Izuku, focus on technology and science. There'll be this wonderful woman named Melissa Shield in his future. Shit like that, simple. And Melissa's just like, Izuku, what, you don't know if that will work. Izuku's just like, if he loses his mom, then Melissa's all that's left for him. And Melissa understands this. And it's just like a very heavy pressure that she feels from this because, she can understand that Izuku's, perception of the world is shattering and breaking. And it's a lot for her to try and hold in, which, is and isn't working. She tries her best because she is trying to be the best girlfriend she could be. But, shit don't always go that way. As like I was saying, one day when they go to UA, because yes, it is, the quirk application test, but Deku is excluded as he is told that he could go to the hero support course, like to finish his, machine or whatever. There will be other people who are just like, wait, so he's in both? As Deku's just like, he builds his gear there, and yeah. Momo would be one of the few people that Izuku does not mind actually talking to because she's smart and she has to know, the molecular structure of the things she creates. So, with her intellect, Deku is just like, you are one of my kind. I shall show you the way of science. Which, yeah. Which, because Deku was such a good guy, he was actually able to, from some extraction of Momo's DNA and, one of the objects that she makes and recording data of her using her quirk, Deku was actually able to create a fabric that helps with her quirk so she can wear a costume, create things, and her costume just closes up without having to be so revealing. Which, Momo was actually very thankful. Which, Mina's just like, you bastard! You ruined what could have been great. And Deku would just shoot like an explosive electric batarang, whatever you want to think of. Just something that would hurt Mineta for being a little pervert. But that's not why we're here, because we're still in the present timeline. I know, we had to build shit. You see, because Deku would eventually have to go back to UA, but there's going to be some changes because the timeline that he'll return to won't be the timeline that he comes from. Because as we know, time travel is a bitch. Some things are about to get dark. You see, rather than the USJ event being, infiltrated, it was just the fact that, there was an assembly for hero support course. Many people were coming in to see the technology of, Izuku and Melissa. This time machine that they worked together, that if it worked, Lord knows what could happen. So there were a lot of people, there was a good commotion. Lots of people were there. All the tests proved that the machine would work. And All for One is, waiting for David to, do the thing and fuck them up. No. Everyone's there. Deku would show this time machine And rather than it being like a simple vehicle, it is a box that they would go into, like a room. Then they would be sent through time, and then they would come back by device. Now, here's where things, fuck up. Well, you know, Izuku explains the time that he's going to be going into. This date when, you know, the day Hisashi would have, gone for his trip. He's going to go back in time, grab something from there, and then come back. And then he'll go into the future and grab something from there. Something that unique. Now, what as something happens. Oh no, what happens? Well, the machine is calculating, power is surging. David pushes a button, and then the computer's not engines, but battery supply starts to malfunction. It's overflowing with more power, more energy than it should have been. This is causing it to overheat and overload. More explosions are starting to set off as everyone's kind of confused. Melissa, she screams out for Izuku, so she runs towards, Izuku, who's trapped inside. He's trying to break free and nothing's happening. Izuku, he feels something behind him, as then the energy breaks, as then it opens and a core is starting to suck and pull him in, as he realizes, shit. This is the end. As he then, looks at Melissa, he smiles, as, he just mouths the I love you and goodbye shit as he gets, sucked in towards this blue orb. And right as he hits the machines that were charging up this blue sphere finally overheat, causing a huge explosion, resulting in Melissa's shield being scorched and completely burned, her whole body incinerated. Death was not immediate, but excruciating, as hours had gone by for surgery in an attempt to save her life, ultimately failing. Soon it became apparent that there was foul play. David Shield admitted to this, pleading guilty, admitting that he was lied to, he was manipulated. He explains that All For One had explained what Izuku's intentions were, or what he told Izuku's intentions were, how he wanted to go back in time and remove the symbol of peace. All Might actually thought, shit, that does kind of sound like something All For One would do, and he also kind of feels bad. Not only did he just see his niece die in a very painful way, her boyfriend, who he also, kind of, mistreated a little bit, was fucked up. His friend David Shield is now going to jail. The quirkless community still don't like All Might because, some shit's going weird. As, since, there's this controversy of people who are so loyal to All Might that they would, kill anyone. And, just so much shit is just, tainting All Might's reputation as the symbol of peace. All For One, who enjoys the anarchy that comes from this, is just like, this is magnificent. Shigaraki's also kind of enjoying All Might being put through the ringer. And, some of the shit's gonna happen, though. No. You see, Izuku, who, he awakens, his body, bandaged up, he has a cloth on his head. It's very cool and refreshing. He hears footsteps as a woman walks in. She has this purple flower kimono. She has average length black hair, pale skin but purple eyes. Izuku looks at her. He smiles weakishly as he's saying, "Sorry to be a bother." As he falls unconscious yet again, time skip 2 days. Izuku awakens, slightly better. He sees this woman, sleeping, resting just aside in the corner. Izuku casually gets up. He feels exhausted. His muscles torn. His body is just bruised and battered. His ribcage shattered. Not shattered, fractured. It hurts to breathe and move around. But he tries his best as he explores the house. He sees something, unique. Sun is setting. He realizes that, he's been out for a long time. He sees that the sun has set and, he's just watching. His stomach rumbles as then a woman behind him saying, "So you're awake." Izuku turns around as he sees Lady Tamayo, as she just gives him this warm smile. Now, in case you're wondering, what about the other demon boy who's supposed to be there? Well, who do you think Izuku is replacing in this timeline? The role of... Oh, I just forgot the little bastard's name. Yushido, I forgot that. Izuku's going to be replacing Yushido's moment right now. And you see, another thing about time travel, because it's a ripple effect once you impact. When but Tanjiro would go sell his charcoal, Nezuko actually would go with him. The youngest brother that was on her back actually is taken by the mom saying, Nezuko, go help your brother. It's good for you both to get more experience being out there. As, the kids here, they can start helping more. So they both would not be there. So they both walk into just their family being murdered and massacred. So there's no demon who would have bloodburst in this timeline. Rather, you have both Nezuko and Tanjiro who buried their family, and Giyu shows up and he apologizes for being late, and both Nezuko and Tanjiro ask if is it possible to avenge their family. Giyu says yes, and their whole Demon Slayer thing starts off very differently, especially because they both would be trained by the spirits, and it's kind of creepy. Anyway, she was just off for a while because, well, Izuku, in the years that he spent with Lady Tamayo, and here's the thing, because, in case you didn't know, the blue spider lily could only bloom in the morning for a few days. Excuse me. Deku had inadvertently found, a bundle of blue spider lilies. Enough that Lady Tamayo was actually able to recreate the demon formula and actually create something else. A strain mutation. One that, actually would further help her develop a cure. Now, here's the thing. With this new one, she put it to her own cells and saw that it would destroy her and killing her, not curing her. However, Izuku, who was still human at the time, was compatible with this formula, and then from there, when it was mixed in with Lady Tamayo's, demonic cells, they bonded even further, but Izuku's cells were more dominant, meaning Tamayo, if she gave this serum to Izuku would become, something like a demon, or a different type of demon, that could rewrite her own demonic DNA as if Muzan's cells were replaced with Izuku's demonic cells, but she's conflicted on doing something like that. Rather, she runs this idea by Izuku, and Izuku would accept the demonic cells, even if it means burning in the sunlight. But here's the thing, test shows that Deku's blood, once exposed to the sunlight, didn't burn. Unlike Lady Tamayo's thing, because there is more blue spider lilies, and Lady Tamayo is using her own cells and demonic blood research, and Izuku's blood being compatible with damn near fucking anything because plot. Yeah, Deku is actually a demon who, strength, power, agility, speed of a demon, requires a little bit of blood and maybe some flesh, but doesn't actually need to eat human lives to the quantity of a demon to gain power. Deku's strength is pretty much cultivated through his own hard work and merit. And Lady Tamayo fucking loves Izuku so much. She even tells Izuku he's like a son to her. And Izuku even admits that, he lost his family different ways, and, although he doesn't know if he could ever go back, he admits Lady Tamayo has been like a mother to him, and he does love her like she was another mother to him. The two, have their moments. Now, things in the canon timeline still kind of progress as normal, with, Tanjiro and Nezuko training under... fuck. I was gonna say Utakata, but I don't think that's right. Hold up. Uragashiki, no. Sakonji Urakadaki. I was nowhere near right. So I'm glad I looked it up. So, Tanjiro and Nezuko studied under Sakonji in the Breath of Water style. And Nezuko, seemed to bond better with the water breathing style than Tanjiro, which comes into play later. As, some other things are going to be different. You see, Nezuko and Tanjiro, they would pass their fall selection. They would tag team kill the hand demon that killed their two, previous senpais. As, they're upperclassmen. Hence why I said they're senpais. As their spirits rest in peace, they would continue on with their missions. When it comes to the girl disappearing missions, Nezuko would use herself as bait. Tanjiro would be against this, but Nezuko, who is a demon slayer, tells him, this is what they trained for. She kills one, Tanjiro kills the other. The other one tries to escape, and, they both cut its head off. Something that I'm just, gonna have to put out there is the fact that when Tanjiro and Nezuko get their udon noodles, and Tanjiro's just like, sniff, sniff, the scent of the murderer, rushes off. Tanjiro leaves Nezuko behind, telling her just to wait here. Nezuko be pouty as fuck, but, the whole Kibutsan Muchi thing would still happen. Nezuko ate her noodles and all this, would be unaware. Now, Tamayo would still carry the demon guy back to her hideout, as Izuku would accompany, Tanjiro back to his. Now, here's where a unique difference is here. Tanjiro looks at Izuku and looked at Tamayo, and he could smell, she's a demon, but he's something else. Like, sniff, sniff. He's not a demon, but he is a demon. Sniff. It's just like, I can't make it out. It's so similar, but not. No, he's not sure. Izuku would eventually call himself as a cursed person. Doomed to, his life, his past. It's just, being cursed is the best way to explain it. Well, I gotta, get ready to watch that one on my YouTube channel. Not my YouTube channel, my Xbox. Oh, fuck, Now, what was I saying? No, you see, Izuku, he kind of gave this weird vibe to, Tanjiro didn't know to trust him right off the bat, but he's saying just to follow him. They'll explain more. Nezuko, who sees Tanjiro, actually has a different reaction altogether. You see, when the two lock eyes, you know, Nezuko instantly blushes. Tanjiro's just like, no, 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 no. Izuku's just like, oh, so this is your, you know, he looks at Tanjiro as he's saying, sister? He nods as, Izuku's just saying, wow. He introduces himself to her, saying Izuku Midoriya. She's saying she's Nezuko Kamado, and, it's nice to meet him. Izuku's saying it's a pleasure to meet a very pretty girl like her. Nezuko's just like, oh shucks, thanks. Tanjiro's just like, I feel deeply disturbed. My sword calls for your blood now. Jokes aside, it get kind of weird. You see, Tanjiro's sword is still a black one. Nezuko's is a pink blade, just for the sake of simplicity. So, yeah. You see, when they go to Lady Tamayo's house, and, we would still have the Temari demon and the Eye demon still coming for them. And, yeah, things are going to be different now. Here is where you would have, Lady Tamayo, giving medicine to, the demonic man, as he screams out in pain, as then his features return to normal. As then this black sludge comes out of his mouth, as he's just like, what the? Tamayo saying, it works only when they're recently turned. What do you mean? Tamayo would give Tanjiro 3 vials, and saying this is pretty much the, anti-demon serums. Wait, what? Izuku would state, using his blood as a base, they found out that his cells destroy, Muzan cells, because his cells have more of a, radiation charge to it, but a bonded radiation charge. So, in other words, it destroys Muzan cells, but once it comes into contact with Muzan cells, it pretty much uses itself up to destroy Muzan cells, leaving it to, leaving the person to be normal. Now, after that part, if Izuku gave them more of his blood, then they would transform more into a demonic creature similar to Izuku. But Izuku explains, he's never had the same urges or tendencies like most demons. Nezuko and Tanjiro would be on edge with Izuku and Tamayo, especially because they're with demons right now. But here's where things get interesting. You see, Izuku explains he isn't even from this time. They wouldn't know how to understand this, and, even when Izuku explains that, so, besides time travel existing and some other bullshit, I, am lost. I don't even belong in your guys' time period. There are a lot of things I'm worried about changing, but also a lot of things that are, not mentioned in my history books. So, oh, fucking hell. Izuku explains a lot of the stuff that are happening now. Yeah, none of this was ever recorded in any of the history books that he's read about. So he's just like, he doesn't know if he's just like, he's in the lost history or what, but he thinks that maybe, just maybe, through collecting enough of the cells of the demons like Muzan and the Upper Moon 12, the 12 moons, not the Upper 12 moons, not the Upper 12, my bad, as, they're like, you want revenge on the man who killed your family? He happens to have a different version of a serum that gave me my powers. Pretty much what makes him give powers to other people. I have something that he wants, and that is the ability to survive in the sunlight. They are like, wait, but that means demons Yeah. Izuku actually would go. Okay. Anyway, back to the what if as. Izuku would go grab one of Nezuko's swords. Not one of them. Grab Nezuko's swords. My bad. As I don't know why I said one of them. I was just thinking of the two swords of Tanjiro and Nezuko, and then I made it seem like Nezuko's a dual wielder. Nah, Nezuko only has the one sword. Anyway, as Izuku grabs Nezuko's sword and then proceeds to cut into his own arm, they saw it cut and then it healed. But what surprised them next was the fact that Nezuko's sword, where it cut, the blood was just, steaming out of existence. Yeah, that was kind of weird. Nezuko's just like, whoa. Fuck. It wasn't turning on. I'm tired. I'm not trying to end the video yet, but I'm also really tired. You know what? Yeah, I'm just gonna end it here. I know that this is not like as long as most people want it to be, but don't worry, we're gonna get back into this later. Other what is to do and continue. Just some shit. No. What if Deku was trained in Mortal Kombat's coming? Don't worry. Wave motion, same quirk. Part 2. Continue, output. He's gonna be out there. Oh yeah, I don't have a ship for that one. I wonder. I need a ship for that one too. That one I already got. That one's already there. That one's there. That one's there. I'm gonna have to fix this one. I don't know. I might just have it where Naruto has Geass or something like that. Or the Geass-gon. Or the Gigon. Nah, I don't know. I don't know how this will work. I'm still trying to figure out most of these what ifs. At the same time, I already got a lot of them done, but I just need time to record them. And then the actual energy to record them. If there's no, no energy, then I yawn a lot. I'm tired. That one should be up. That one's, I need to continue. That one's gonna be continued. I have part 2 of that one. That one I enjoyed. Yes. You see, let's end it with the quick fight of Tamari and Eyeball Guy. I was just talking to my brother yet again. Back to the what if as, like I was saying. See, in this timeline, something else is happening. You see, when the Tamari demon and the Eyeball demon, it was my brother pretty much giving me the keys to his car because he said he's off, so I can just take his whip to the car instead of the other car that I borrow, because that guy's not going to work, but he does need a car. It's just some other shit. Anyway, back to the what if as, yes, Tamari demon throws her balls and trying to fuck shit up, and, well, it almost hits Nezuko's pretty little face, only to be stopped by Izuku's hand. He caught it. He looks visibly pissed off. He's just saying, Lady Tamayo. As, she's saying, understood. As, she tells not Izuku, but Tanjiro and Nezuko to, leave this to Izuku. As they're like, what? What do you mean? We're demon slayers. But, they're like, yes, but the people who are here have a large amount of Muzan's blood. And it's very dangerous for you guys. We don't want you to get hurt. And of course, Nezuko's still like, I can protect myself, she already has this, dark resentment towards demons right now that, kinda unhealthy. But she also feels conflicted because Izuku's, not giving her the same vibe as the other demons that they've killed has. Especially because the fact that Izuku has not killed any demon, not killed demons, but killed humans, surprises them. They admit, just a little drops of blood and they'll be fine for a good amount of time. And yeah. And then the fact that Izuku could just walk out in casual daylight allows him to, you know, live a normal life. As something's about to happen. That's just part of it. I love this song. It's old as fuck though. If you were dead or still alive, I don't care. I don't care. If you the things you left behind, I don't care. I don't care. My bad, guys. I'm sorry. I do like that song a lot. As back to the what if. You see, the Tamari demon and the eyeball demon just look at Izuku, who stands in front of them. He's annoyed, saying they done fucked up by barging into his mom's house, uninvited. Didn't their parents teach him any manners? As the demons retort, saying, how could a demon protect two demon slayers? As Izuku, quiet, speed blitzes past the eyeball demon faster than what he could see, pun intended, as Izuku, punches him right in the mouth, crashing him into the ground. As Izuku then quickly turns around to block the ball being thrown at him by the Tamari girl, Izuku blocks it with one hand, kicks it back at her, hitting her in the face. It doesn't kill her, but then she's pissed off, so, she takes off her robe, does the 6-arm thing, starts throwing multiple Tamari balls, and Izuku's just kicking them, punching them back and forth. The arrow demon is still trying to get at him, but Izuku's dodging and moving all of his attacks. Even when they synchronize trying to get the Tamari balls to hit Izuku, none of it is working. They are completely missing, and Izuku is just holding his own in front of both of them. Tanjiro and Nezuko step outside to see Izuku actually winning the fight. Despite the arrowhead demon trying to hit Izuku with balls, there would be moments that surprise them. Like right before impact, Izuku seemingly just disappears, and one of the other demons takes his place. The Tamari demon was not thrilled the fact that a ball hit her, one of her own balls, hit her in the face because of the demon's arrow. She couldn't send it back because of the arrow's direction. And then the demon who has the arrows, got hit in the face by some balls that didn't have arrows on them because, he tried to explain it was an accident, but she was not having any of it. So she was just on again with their bullshit. Which, one person in particular would not let this go down. She's just like, I see my opening and I'm gonna fucking take it. Nezuko with the fourth water surface slash, or is that the first form? No, I think that is the first form, water surface slash. So, first form. And you'll soon burn, darling, you give love a bad name. Sorry. Anyway, Nezuko rushes in, water style, water surface slash, decapitates the Tamari ball demon. Eyeball demon is just like, what the fuck? As Izuku just like, gotcha, kicks him up into the air. Tanjiro already jumps up with the water wheel, cutting the demon in half. GG's, game over. Teamwork wins. Nezuko and Tanjiro, they're looking at Izuku, and Izuku's just like, thanks. I appreciate it. They're looking at Izuku kind of like, you see, Tanjiro, who he's about to grab his sword, Izuku's just like, fuck. This is when Nezuko slaps Tanjiro upside the head, saying, brother, don't do that. Besides, he saved me first. And, Nezuko's just looking at Izuku and she blushes a little bit. As she's just like, besides, it's obvious he wants to kill the same guy who killed our family. Izuku's just like, what the fuck? Do tell. They give their quick backstory of how, you know, Tanjiro and Nezuko went down the village selling charcoal for their family, only to find their family to be slaughtered. They buried them. The water pillar Giyu took them to train under Sankonji Urikadaki, and now that they have water breathing, they're here. They're demon slayers. They're going to get revenge. They're going to kill Muzan and all the 12 moons. Izuku smiles as he's just like, well, I mean, I kind of, want to tag along. Is that okay? Their eyes widen as, Tamayo's just like, I knew I wouldn't be able to talk you out of it eventually. Izuku, when you go, please be careful. Oh, Izuku would hug Tamayo and saying, I will, Mom. Thank you for everything. No, they have a, sad thing. But, Tanjiro's just like, but I never said you could. Nezuko's just like, yay! She wraps her arms around Izuku, as Izuku and Tanjiro are just like, what the? Nezuko's just saying, yay! Now we have someone to fight demons with us. Yes, fight fire with fire. As, she, starts pulling off Izuku into upstairs as she's saying, come on, let's go. We're going to kill the demons. Izuku's just like, whoa, she's, very, very bold. Tanjiro's just like, Nezuko. Nezuko, who, she has this little side of her that's, like, hey, demons, I'm gonna fuck your shit up and I'm gonna enjoy my shit just because, y'all kill people. Y'all fuck up people's lives. Y'all just terrible, terrible things. But, Izuku, who's defending life and protecting it, she's just like, he's good. He's not even a demon in my eyes. You said Izuku Midoriya, right? She would compliment him, saying that that's a nice name. Izuku, who's just like, I've been accepted. Just some fun shit. Some other things that are very unique but very fun is the fact that, in the next mission with Kyoga, the drum demon, when there's a kid who needs help, it's Izuku who's able to bring him over to them. And they're confused on how Izuku's being able to switch places with things. Izuku explains that, right now, he's using his Kikigek. No, what was it? Let me look up the Japanese one. I know it's Blood Demon Art, but hold up. Yeah, Kikigetsu. Damn it, I was right. I hate when I second guess myself. But you do it all the time, Ivan. I know I do, brain. Shut up. You're still recording. Oh, shit, yeah, huh? My bad. Yeah, I'm a bit psychotic. Anyway, back to the what if. As like I was saying, you have where, Tanjiro and Nezuko pretty much hear Izuku explain that his Kikigets pretty much lets him expel his energy outward into an area of effect. That area of effect is then his to manipulate. Kind of similar to Law's Ope no Mi, where, the more energy he outputs, the more of a territory he gains. Now, keep in mind, he explains how this house works in a similar fashion. Him being able to switch two objects in the place is just, all on him. If he wants to use more elaborate techniques within his space, manipulating the energy around him, it depends. Different hand signs will have different effects, and they're like, hand signs? He would nod as he's saying, yeah, hand signs. As he explains how he found out, certain gestures and hand movements would help him gather his blood demon arts to, bring forward unique techniques that, if, compared to the average demon, he explains this would be their own thing. One technique. This house and the drumming that he does probably has different abilities, He explains the switching, the flipping, there's probably all a different drum beat, to activate this condition. But Izuku would be able to cause a similar effect just by weaving a hand sign. Different hand signs, different effects. It just depends on the environment around him and how he can manipulate his energy within said environment. Now, he's not invincible to say that. No, attacks can still hit him and he could still be caught up in other people's kick he gets, but that's not the important part. What's important is, the fact that one person in particular there, and that it would be Inosuke, who, when he finds Izuku, he rushes towards him, ready to cut him down. I think it's that, the live chat one, the live stream one that he did. Patreon. I know, I'm working on Patreon. Trying. Anyway, Inosuke would have rushed towards Izuku, and when he tried to cut him down, Izuku would just create, spikes from the wood in the house to block Inosuke's swords. Kyoga would be taken out by the tag team of Tanjiro and Nezuko. Nezuko, who also would not devalue Kyoga's writing, and even, explain how could he be so careless with his own work. Does he not have pride in it? Nezuko, who would grab one of the papers, would read it, and, Kyoga would lose his shit trying to cut her down with it. But Nezuko would actually compliment him for this, saying it was such a shame that he became a demon. She would have loved to have been able to read his poetry to her siblings. Which, heartstrings, cue in the sad motion. Not the sad motion, the sad music as, he would surrender and, Nezuko would land the fifth breathing form. Rain, merciful rain after drought, as, not Deku, but Tanjiro would have been the one who complimented his, demon technique, and Nezuko complimented his human writing. As he dies, fulfilled. But what, kinda surprises everyone is, Tanjiro, who's, fighting both Zenitsu and Inosuke, which ends kind of weirdly, because, Zenitsu's trembling, terrified, saying that, he's a demon, he should be burning in the sun. Inosuke's just like, yeah, that's right, you're different, aren't you? You're probably the strongest demon, so if I beat you, then I can beat the sun itself. Kind of mad lad logic. But, Izuku beats both of them, doesn't kill them, and he's just like, panting and sighing as he's just saying, look, you guys, hear me out. Yes, I'm a demon. Yes, you're demon slayers. But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to kill me. As, Zenitsu's just like, that's exactly what it means. Trying to cut him down again. And Inosuke, who's, still hurt, tries to fight him. But, surprise of everyone, Tanjiro, who blocks Zenitsu, and Nezuko, who pretty much was able to drop kick Inosuke into a tree, as Nezuko would rush towards Izuku. She sees that not Nezuko, but Izuku was, just a little bit bruised up as she pulls out a cloth and starts tending to his wounds. Zenitsu's confused on why two demon slayers are helping demons, as, they kind of have to go into this weird, backstory of a backstory of a backstory. And how Izuku tells it to Zenitsu and Inosuke is he was turned into a demon, by his mom, who was a demon too, who abandoned him when he was a baby. He is older now, and, well, he didn't like the fact that his mom took away his humanity, because, his mom had killed, the current family he had, and, well, now he's trying to kill all demons. And, the thing is, with him, since he can't die in the sunlight, which was what he was hoping for when, after his demonification, he waited for the sunlight to burn him to ash. He saw that he didn't, So he takes it as his personal mission to kill all demons and then, live in solitude until he can figure out a way to kill himself. Which, Zenitsu is just like, that is dark as shit. And then Nezuko, who would wrap her arms around Izuku, saying, you know, after they kill Muzan, even if, he's a demon, that doesn't mean she can't love him. And, Zenitsu's just like, I must kill you. But nah. Sanjiro would kind of explain to Zenitsu, just like, hey, my younger sister can choose who she marries, you little fucker. And Zenitsu's just like, but we're both demon slayers. We're perfect for each other. Tanjiro's saying, but with that logic, wouldn't any other woman demon slayer be okay with you? I will not allow my sister to date such a womanizer. Zenitsu's just like, I am not a womanizer. Then stop being a horn dog. And that is the end of it. Inosuke's just like, as long as I get to fight you, I'm fine. Izuku's just saying, okay, we can fight multiple times. I can train you to take down even stronger demons. And, Inosuke just likes being strong. So, Inosuke don't fight people. But, in the world of My Hero Academia, something, has drastically changed. You see, now in the new timeline, the events of Nana Shimura's death are non-existent, and, well, rather it was Gran Torino who sacrificed himself for Nana to take an unconscious Toshinori Yagi, and, hey, I don't have one for all. I don't even give a fuck about hero life. I just, loved you, Nana. And that was the best life I could have lived. As the new timeline's Gran Torino dies, saving, Nana Shimura and Toshinori Yagi, the effects of which, have yet to settle down, as the ripples of Izuku being sent back in time, creating a new timeline, have yet to fully settle. Find out what happens next.